yes, you can definitely have an anxiety disorder and it's rough. You definitely can struggle with ADHD and it can be really, really, really tough to get your stuff together. But the more you focus on that and you let that be your narrative, that like, oh, I can't because of this, or I have to make this stop. That was a huge one for me, always fighting that feeling. Every time I fought that feeling, I would get so frustrated. I felt like I was a bad Christian. My mom would be like, Megan, you know how to pray, you need to pray. And I'm like, I have prayed and cried and begged God to make me not feel this way. I don't believe it. Like, it's not happening. And the truth was, I was doing it all wrong. I was putting so much energy and so much effort into making it go away that my brain saw that as a signal as, no, Megan, this is really bad. You have to make this stop. And it was just one more thing to make me anxious. And the less I think about it, the less I focus on it, the less I feel it, and the less I have anxious thoughts. The more focus you give that, and really the more focus you give anything in your life that you don't want to give power to, the more power it gets. So it's really about shifting your focus to what you want and away from the things that you don't want.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez. And today we have special guest, Megan Devito. Megan, thank you for being here today on the Truth That Heals podcast.
Thank you so much for asking me. I'm really excited to be here and talk with you.
So a cool thing about the internet is that it's grown so much over the years, and I've connected with you through an app called Threads. It's like the new Twitter kind of thing, but more based out of Instagram. It's been wonderful for me. I don't know, how has Threads been working for you?
Threads has been really interesting. I was old school Twitter before Twitter went dark. I was on Twitter for years. I mean, I think I started maybe 12, 13 years ago on Twitter, and it was my happy place. And I loved it there because it was just back and forth conversations. And then it got kind of mean and political, and I left. And I was like, well, I mean, Facebook's fine. I don't love it. Instagram's fine. But Threads felt like Twitter reimagined. And my hope is that it will stay that way. It's shifted a little bit, but I like it there. It's a great place to meet people, and I like lighthearted, funny things, but to also be able to connect with people who I'm like, oh, wait a second, I can help you. So yeah, I like Threads a lot.
Cool. Well, I'm so happy that we were able to connect. And
Yes.
Before we even really get started, can you share with the audience a bit about what it is that you do?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I am a life coach, and I help people who struggle with feeling anxious, feeling stressed, feeling overwhelmed by whatever's going on in their life. It can be anything from I'm trying to figure out how to balance my work and my life schedule because I don't have any time for myself, to I'm overwhelmed with emotions. I don't know what to do with all of these feelings I have. And then just helping them manage the stress that shows up in their day-to-day lives so that they can do the things that they really want to do. So life coaching is very forward focused, very goal focused, very let's get you from where you are right now to where you want to be. And I help people work through those feelings in their body and then the thoughts that come up, especially when those feelings in their body happen, to help them say, okay, what's really going on? Like, what do you really think will happen if you tried this one step? What sounds like a really good first step for you? It's very client driven. It's very forward focused. So I help people get what they want.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So my next question is, did you always have this desire to work in this field?
Mm-hmm. So before I was a life coach, I was actually a teacher for a very long time. I taught just 2 or 3 years in public school, and then I worked in a small school for at-risk students. And I taught mainly high school students for about 15-ish years on and off. And I knew I was ready to leave the classroom. I knew that teaching wasn't where I needed to be anymore. So I started looking into other things, and I stumbled upon coaching. And I thought, I can teach anybody anything. And I was already coaching swim. So I was coaching a sport and already teaching. And I thought, wait a second, I can do this. So it was funny. When I started getting my coaching certifications, I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do. I was like, I'm not sure what this is. I just know it sounds really great. And I moved. It was how I transitioned out of the classroom and into coaching full time. So I still get to use a little bit of my teaching skills, but a lot of it is so much more, I would call it facilitating conversations and facilitating thinking on other people's parts, helping them learn to trust themselves, to feel confident, to be able to understand that, like, no, you already know the answer. I'm just going to help you pull it out of your brain. So I think it was a natural transition from teaching to coaching for me, but I didn't know what coaching was for a long time. I happened to stumble upon it.
So when was the moment where you finally realized, wow, this is what coaching is all about? Was there like a landmark moment in your life where it was like, this is it?
Oddly, it runs into my whole story about how I started helping people with stress and anxiety. My backstory, my story about who I was growing up is really feels like it's just interwoven with so much anxiety. I had really disordered health anxiety from the time I was in the third grade until I was 40. But somewhere along the line in there, I was out. I used to take walks every afternoon. I have 4 kids. I needed some quiet. I would take a walk and I would listen to audiobooks. And I was listening to the book You Are a Badass. And she started talking about the things she was doing. And there's nothing in this book that's about anxiety at all. It's not about mental health. It's basically a manifestation book. I knew nothing at all about manifestation. But in the book, at one point, she said, I hired a coach. And I was like, what? What is that? I didn't even know what it was. And she started talking about this coach and the things that she was working on. I'm like, that's pretty amazing. I could do that. That was it. But in that same book, she had said, worry is wishing for what you don't want. And I thought, who would ever do that? And it kind of dawned on me, wait a minute. Are you telling me that all of those anxious thoughts are I'm just wishing for things that I don't want? Like, who would do that? And it flipped this switch in my brain. I mean, that's this defining moment really in my entire recovery from anxiety, was almost at the exact same time as when I was like, life coach? What's a life coach? And hearing about that, it just all came together. And not at the same time. I got my coaching certifications around the same time I started recovering from anxiety, but I started out as a health and wellness coach where I was teaching people how to eat better and lose weight and things like that. That wasn't for me. And I ended up transitioning into life coaching because all of a sudden I'm like, I haven't been anxious in a really long time. I can teach other people how to do this.
Something that I find interesting from this conversation is I see that overall health is very important to you, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
the body, the mind, the soul. But you mentioned something about there was a switch
Mm-hmm.
where it shed a light on anxiety and you
Mm-hmm.
knew what it was now. What was
Mm-hmm.
life like before that switch went off? How was life like when
Oh.
there was anxiety, I guess, hiding in your life?
That's a really good question. And I think that for people who live, especially, I would say most of my clients don't necessarily have an anxiety disorder. You can be a very anxious person and not have an anxiety disorder. For me, I did have an anxiety disorder. And it's the best way I can describe it is where your brain misinterprets the way that your body feels. And my body felt anxious all the time, all the time. And I would come up with these ideas of what I thought was wrong. So let's say I heard a story about someone who had some type of cancer. I would immediately think, "Oh my gosh, that's what this feeling in my body is. I'm gonna die." And I would get on Google and I would research it. And I would ask my parents over and over and over again, "Are you sure you think I'm okay? Like something is wrong." So I was really misinterpreting the way my body felt. And in that entire process of learning that what's happening in your body is actually that it's wired. It's just so anxious. You're carrying so much stress in your body. You're so full of cortisol and so full of adrenaline all the time that it feels really bad and it feels very urgent and scary. And that's normal.
Mhm.
And I don't think it ever occurred to me that other people had that same feeling, but also that that feeling inside your body will cause your brain just to think random thoughts to try to figure out what's going on. Oh, you feel that way because it's this problem or this problem or this problem. Some people will think that it's because people are talking about them behind their back. Other people will think that everybody thinks they're stupid or that they're going to fail, whatever it was. Mine just happened to focus on my health. And so my brain would spin these stories that I believed because they felt really urgent and really terrifying and like a problem that I needed to solve. And it was really me trying to solve problems that didn't exist by creating problems that I didn't ever need to create. So I think that idea of what it was that was happening was really, I learned that I didn't have to believe what I was thinking. But in the past, I'd always thought if I thought that, I better solve for that because that would be really bad. If I had this thing, it would be terrible. It would be bad. I need to fix this. Whereas now I'm like, oh, well, that's one thought. That would be really scary. And I don't have to believe it anymore.
Well, that I find that very challenging because I mean, we have our opinions, but when your brain is kind of fabricating these stories, these narratives on your health, how were you able to, I guess, uh, how were you able to shift away from that, from not only the
Mm-hmm.
thoughts, but also the feeling that you're sick?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very simple, but not easy, especially because your body is designed to do this stuff. This is one of those caveman kind of body processes that we just haven't evolved out of yet. So your brain is just trying to keep you safe and trying to keep you alive. And so it does come up with those things so that you know how to solve those problems. And it does it even when it creates the problems that aren't there. But the real trick in all of this is to learn how to use your body on your to get your body on your side as opposed to letting it run you down that rabbit hole of thinking. So for some people, it's really the feeling of anxiety in their body that's the problem that causes them to think. For other people, they get a trigger about in their thoughts or something and it causes them to feel. But it's a cycle of thinking and feeling and thinking and feeling. So if you can take that feeling, whatever is normal for you, for some people, they feel like their heart's going too fast. For some people, they feel like they can't swallow. For other people, they feel like they're going to throw up. Whatever the feeling is for them, and it doesn't matter what it is, if you can say, oh, wait, I know what that is. I've felt that before. Then it becomes safe because you can say, oh, wait, that feeling, that really urgent, scary feeling, I know what's going to happen next. I'm going to start thinking. So if we can say, when I feel this feeling inside my body, I am not allowed to believe anything that I think right now. When the feeling goes away, if the thought's still there, then I can think about it. So it was me learning to delay the thinking to begin with and to start noticing patterns in my thinking. Isn't it crazy that every time I would feel this feeling, I would think something different was wrong and I've never been right? So it was this really backward process of proving myself wrong and proving that I was safe. But it always went back to, I feel really anxious. I'm not allowed to believe what I'm thinking right now, even though it feels really true and really scary and I want to fix it. It's just a thought. Because what happens is when the feeling goes away, those thoughts aren't there anymore. They just kind of dissolve and float away too.
Wow. So, wow, I've never really had a discussion about anxiety, so this is all eye-opening to me. I'm really
Mm-hmm.
learning something new here. And we've discussed how life was like before you had that switch go off on anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and what it was. How did life change for you after that switch went off and you saw that anxiety didn't have to control your life anymore? How did your life
Mm-hmm.
change after that moment?
I spent most of my life thinking I was going to feel that way forever and that everything was going to be scary and that was how it was going to be. And I was just going to be one of those people that was always terrified that I was going to die. And obviously everybody's going to die at some point, right? But I
Yes.
thought it was going to happen any minute. So and it's always in some like grandiose, really tragic, dramatic, horrible way, right? Never like if I would have got hit by a bus, I'd have been like, cool. But this was going to be bad. Like I was going to have to lay in it for a while. So it was always really big and kind of existential. Um, and I think just realizing that I didn't have to, first of all, believe everything I thought was amazing, but also the idea that in this place, I found out I wasn't the only person. The more people I talked to, they were like, you thought that too? Thought I was the only person that thought that. I'm like, no, I thought I was the only person. So finding out I wasn't the only person was still when I hear people say what their anxiety would circle around, I'm like, no kidding. You too? So I think it was interesting for me to hear that I wasn't the only person, but it was also really interesting for me to realize that the less I focused on it and made it a part of who I was, the less I experienced it. And I think that as much as I love threads, one of the things that I see on threads so much right now that is driving me crazy. And I understand why people do it. Like, we want to have an answer for why we feel what we feel or why we do what we do. Like, I get why people want to do that. But I see so many people that say, I can't, it's my ADHD. I can't, it's my anxiety. I can't, I have OCD. I can't, I'm autistic. And I'm like, no. Yes, you can definitely have an anxiety disorder and it's rough. You definitely can struggle with ADHD and it can be really, really, really tough to get your stuff together. But the more you focus on that and you let that be your narrative, that like, oh, I can't because of this, or I have to make this stop. That was a huge one for me, always fighting that feeling. Every time I fought that feeling, I would get so frustrated. I felt like I was a bad Christian. My mom would be like, Megan, you know how to pray, you need to pray. And I'm like, I have prayed and cried and begged God to make me not feel this way. I don't believe it. Like, it's not happening. And the truth was, I was doing it all wrong. I was putting so much energy and so much effort into making it go away that my brain saw that as a signal as, no, Megan, this is really bad. You have to make this stop. And it was just one more thing to make me anxious. And the less I think about it, the less I focus on it, the less I feel it, and the less I have anxious thoughts. The more focus you give that, and really the more focus you give anything in your life that you don't want to give power to, the more power it gets. So it's really about shifting your focus to what you want and away from the things that you don't want.
Something you said right
And
now. Oh,
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead. Oh, well, and really for anybody who has an anxiety disorder, if you have some serious trauma, if you have genuine disordered anxiety, there is a process of talking to a therapist in there and working that out of your nervous system, because it's not all in your head. It's absolutely in your body, which is why I focus so much on how your body feels. But I'm like speaking to people who I'm helping. Generally, those people are like, I just get so anxious, or these things stress me out. So I'm not to the point where I'm like, look, you have big T trauma. You definitely want to talk to a therapist and work on that. I can help you with anxiety that comes up, like that's happening day to day like that. But if it's something big, that would be therapeutic and healing the past. And you can also work with the coach to move forward, if that makes sense.
Totally. It's very good information that you're giving, and I'm learning so much. But I wanted to go back to something that you said, that when you were, I guess, when you were opening up to this world of, okay, you were going through anxiety, you mentioned that you were connecting with other people. Oh, you're going through this, you're going through that. You're seeing that other people were also experiencing some of the same things.
Mm-hmm.
How important is it, do you think, when someone is on this journey, to connect with others who are also trying to overcome this challenge of anxiety?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think there's a fine line there. I think there's always something very reassuring about knowing that someone else gets it. Like, finding out that you're not the only person is so good. That was amazing to me. A quick story about me as a kid. I was an 80s kid. And so I grew up in the age of like crazy 80s stuff. But in the middle of all that, like in the middle of whatever was happening with the Cold War and all that, we all started in the middle of the AIDS epidemic. And it was terrifying as a kid to know that, like, we didn't know where it came from. We just knew that if you got it, you were good as dead. And I remember like the first panic attack I ever had, it was in middle school. I was in the library, I was looking at a magazine. I don't know if it was Time magazine or Life magazine. And it had this guy on the front of it named Ryan White. I'm from Indiana. And Ryan White was from Indiana. He was also this first kid who got AIDS. He was a teenager. He was a heterosexual male who happened to have hemophilia. And they're like, he got it, he died. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that is terrifying. And did it occur to me that I didn't have hemophilia? I wasn't having blood transfusions, but I was terrified of anything that was like, I didn't want anyone to like, I didn't want to touch things because what if there was blood on it and I didn't know, and I had a cut and I didn't know, and then I would get it. I mean, anxiety is very irrational. And it's not, I mean, people say just calm down and think rationally. I laugh because I'm like, that's not how your brain works at all. If it was, I would have been like, no, that's stupid. Like, hindsight, But I thought I was the only person that was that freaked out about that. I thought everyone else was like, no, it's really not that big of a problem. Until I was at work one day with a girl who I went to the same elementary school with, who was like the same age as me. And she's like, I thought I was the only person that had that happen. She goes, I had the same thing happen to me. And I'm like, we rode the school bus together. And neither of us knew the other one was. We just kept our mouths shut because nobody talked about it. So, in terms of like to answer your question, it's great to know that, like, oh my gosh, I'm so
Hmm.
glad to know I wasn't the only person going through that. And and that same and that same idea of sharing that experience, making sure that it stays something that is proactive, where you're not going back and always seeking reassurance from that person. Do you think I'm okay? Hey, is this normal for you? It's so bad. Isn't it so bad? That's commiserating. And that's also reassurance seeking, and seeking reassurance, even though it feels really good. And part of it can feel really, like really validating. It can also make your brain think, yeah, you dodged another one. You better ask again. You better be checking to make sure you're not the only person. So there's a fine line there
Hmm.
between saying, yes, somebody else gets it, and yes, I need this person to tell me that they get it too.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, you always have like, hey, have a friend that you can confide in, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
But with this anxiety, I see it's a little different. So I'm learning so much. I'm very
Mm-hmm.
thankful. Um, but now I wanted to get into uh your life narrative after this change in your life, because before the narrative
Mm-hmm.
was you were constantly sick or you were constantly worried, of course, always
Mm-hmm.
anxious. How does life look like now that you've made this change?
Yeah. So now when I feel anxious, and there are times when I do because I'm human and that's what bodies do, it's in the past, I would have gotten caught up in what I would call like really, really long anxiety attacks where it just took over every moment of your day. If you got a half an hour during the day where you weren't thinking about it, it would slam back in. It was just like, I would just call it like a hurricane where it would just spin and it would just keep bumping into you all until it found something else. You get a little break and then there would be a new trigger to focus on and then it would just swirl around. Now, when I have something that maybe triggers me or something, and my triggers aren't the same, they're very different than they were. Now I'm like, oh, I know what this is. And I'm like, okay, I know what my brain's going to do. It's going to go down this rabbit hole. And I'll go do something like take a walk or work on, write a blog or record a podcast. And it doesn't. I mean, it goes from being something that lasts for days or weeks for me to, I don't know, half an hour, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, depending on what it is. If it's something small, it'll just be, it'll just come and go. And that's very normal human biology, right? Even for a time where if there's something where it's like all of a sudden I'm like, why do I feel so anxious? I'm 48 and your hormones when you're a 48-year-old woman are wonky. And so sometimes your body just gets a big hit of adrenaline or a big hit of cortisol and you just feel anxious and there are no thoughts. It's just like, oh, this feeling, I don't even have a thought about what it is. It just feels bad. And then it doesn't mean anything. You're just like, well, it's just anxiety in my body. And then it's just like it'll work its way out in a little bit and it goes away on its own. So I don't necessarily go down that same thought spiral or
Hmm.
that same process of making it last for a really, really long time. It's just a normal human reaction.
But wow, so before it would last for days, even a week, but now it's just, I mean, you brought this conversation to real life where, hey, we're all
Mm-hmm.
human. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's going to happen. We're going to have these
Mm-hmm.
feelings. But then you also shared some exercises or activities that you do that anybody can do, which is something like go take a walk or do something. And I think that these little things really shed a lot of light. And hopefully those who are in the audience, if they're having problems with anxiety, maybe they can do activities like this. Are there any other activities that maybe you suggest for starters to do?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's two things that you can always do. And I like these because you can do them no matter where you are and no one will know. And so I used to teach these when I was teaching high school. I would teach these to my students because I did have kids who had been in some traumatic life experiences, who were dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety. Um, and one of the things that people will say, you see this in movies or on TV shows a lot, where they'll say, just breathe, just breathe. And I'm like, whatever, you're already breathing. Like you're not dead, you're breathing. Breathing is not the problem. It's how you're breathing that's the problem. So one of the things that you can do, I've done this when I'm driving my car. If I'll just be like, there's nothing wrong, I feel anxious, you can shut that feeling in your body off by flipping the switch on your nervous system and changing it from your sympathetic to your, or from your sympathetic nervous system to your parasympathetic. So your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight. That's when you feel really anxious and keyed up. Your parasympathetic is your rest and digest. It's like everything's fine, nothing's wrong. And you can flip that in like a minute by exhaling. So we say breathe and everybody goes, and they breathe in and I'm like, no, 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 no. Exhale really far. Exhale. And then we want to breathe out as far as you can. So you feel like you're squishing your body flat as a pancake. And then slowly breathe in. Hold your breath for a few seconds. And exhale longer than you inhaled. Really long exhale. And then pause and wait until you need to breathe again. Otherwise, you'll hyperventilate. So pause, breathe back in, hold your breath, and exhale as far as you can. And you can feel the tension fall out of your shoulders or out of your jaw, wherever you're holding that tension. And it will make your brain flip over back into rest and relax. You can do that in the middle of class. If you're a student, you can do it in the boardroom. If you're working, you can do it on the bus, on the train, on the airplane. No one's going to know. You're just breathing. And nobody's going to hear you. I mean, you can be dramatic about it for sure. You could like, if you want, that's fine, but you don't have to. You can just exhale for a really long time. Nobody's going to know. So that's
Well,
one thing you can do. Another thing you can do to shut off those thoughts, and I just learned this one the other day, and I realized when I heard this, I'm like, I've been doing this for years and never, ever, ever knew that it had anything to do with regulating my nervous system. Hum, sing a song. So when you sing, the vibration in the back of your note actually stimulates a nerve that like it's your vagus nerve. And it's the one that's really responsible for regulating your nervous system. It's like the biggest nerve in your body. So when you just hum, or if you sing a song, it takes that nerve and it shakes it just enough that if you just hum, it makes it really hard to think thoughts because it shuts that communication off and it calms your body down. So when you see monks on the side of a mountain that are like, Om, that's what they're doing. That Om is all about like shaking that vagus nerve.
it's about. So, are there any songs that you hum that you?
No, I noticed that I'll just go like it's just almost like I mean, even not a song, even just a.
It becomes like a mantra, kind of.
I didn't even notice that I would do it until I was like, wait a second, sometimes I do that. And I had heard that I knew that humming would stimulate that nerve, but I didn't realize how much it actually does shut off the brain chatter.
So these are some new activities that I've learned today, with the breathing. I've heard a bit about that, like in movies, of course, and as you've mentioned.
Just breathe. Yeah.
but humming, I guess I'll be doing that more in private, like when I'm driving or maybe when I'm working and I don't want to do my job. And I guess maybe that's a good activity that I can start doing. Now I wanted to jump into another topic, and that is the podcast. You have a podcast. Can you walk us through what it was like starting the podcast and how did you get the idea to start it in the first place?
I think I wanted to do a podcast for a long time. I used to have a blog and I loved to write. I was home. I was taking care of my youngest daughter when she was little. So when she would take naps, I would blog and I loved it. It was always a really great outlet for me. Um, and I didn't necessarily want to get back into blogging. I was already writing weekly emails to my clients. I was writing a lot of different things like that. But I loved doing Facebook Lives. I knew that I could get on and I could teach anybody anything. And it was so natural for me just to get up and talk that I was like, I would love to make a podcast. That would be really fun. And I can make a podcast about anxiety and it'll be so good with my business. And then it gave me something to focus on. So I'd like to say that there was some really amazing underlying thought in the name of the podcast, more than anxiety, like you are more than anxiety or your life is more than anxiety. And that's true, absolutely. But it was really because I don't want to just talk about anxiety. I want to talk about more than anxiety. So it kind of opened the door for me to talk about whatever I wanted, but it generally does focus on stress, anxiety, overwhelm, and how to manage those things. So I really got into it because I'm not shy. And it was a great outlet for me to be able to help people. And it's so fun. I love it.
Were you always not shy?
I don't think I've ever been shy. I'm
Now,
not shy.
now,
I'm very introverted, but I am not shy. And those aren't the same at all. But yeah.
now this is interesting
Mhm,
because most people are anxious. Their anxiety goes through the roof when they
mhm,
have to do public speaking or they have to speak to
mhm,
others, and they get super shy.
mhm,
And here you are sharing that it was like natural to you.
mhm. Yeah,
Wow.
I've gone up and given awards at like the high school. Our high school has an awards thing. I don't know, like an awards day where all the high schoolers go up. I'll go up and give awards. I can go up and talk in front of my church. I can give presentations to people. It doesn't bother me at all. I mean, I might feel a little nervous ahead of time, but no, it doesn't bother me. But really, anxiety, because it's in and of itself, anxiety is just a feeling in your body. Those thoughts that you have
Mm.
about what could potentially go wrong or what is wrong or what you're anxious about, those are just symptoms that come from the feeling. And that's why if you deal with the feeling, and then you can say, like, what's the worst thing that could happen if you go up and talk in front of somebody? And if somebody says, so for example, I love that you brought this up. If somebody says, oh, I could never go up and talk in front of somebody, what if I say something stupid? And my answer is always like, yeah, what if you do?
Yeah.
Then what? And like, what happens? And for me, that was never a thing. I always just figured that I had said so many words in my life that I'd already said everything that could ever possibly be stupid. But it's what would people think of me? What would I think of myself? Those underlying reasons for why we have our anxious thoughts. Um, and so for me, my anxiety never focused on social situations ever.
Oh,
Like I could go into a network marketing thing and be like, hey, what's up? I'm Megan. And introduce myself to people just fine. But if you asked me to I don't know. Like back in the day, if you would have asked me to go take the hands of somebody who had AIDS, let's say back when I would like in high school or something, no way. I wouldn't even walk in the building.
mhm.
Not because I didn't want to meet the people, because I was terrified. I would get it. Mine is just never focused on that. So for some people, they focus more on maybe it is social situations. A lot of people have a fear of being in large groups and being trapped. Or other people, like they won't go to concerts because what will I do? There'll be so many people getting lost, not being able to, whatever it is, it's so unique. Yeah, we have these groups of things that people tend to focus on. Mine just was never about talking to people.
Now you just gave me a revelation because I don't know that much about anxiety, but the way I viewed it
Mm-hmm.
was if someone is going through anxiety, then their whole life it's all about anxiety. But
Mm-hmm.
now I'm kind of, I guess, opening my mind to seeing that there are situations where people might be fine, nice and dandy, but in other areas there might be anxiety. And I'm realizing that me personally, I have had a lot of anxiety when it comes to social settings
Mm-hmm.
because I've had this experience where, okay, I'm going to go and let's say I'm going to do maybe not a podcast, but let's say I'm going to go and uh, go to a reunion or something. And there's some people I want to talk to, but I can't get myself to approach this group, and then I have like a buddy of mine saying something like, "Oh, just take some liquid courage." And I don't,
Yeah, right.
I don't want to take liquid courage, but but I get through it. But it's just so, I feel that this conversation has been enlightening to me because, yeah, there are areas where I can be, uh, going through anxiety. And this is also a revelation that these activities that you're setting up, they can be very useful. So I'm
Mhm.
definitely going to be using this tonight when I go when I go clubbing.
Oh, that sounds, and it is fun because it really like, and it is normal to feel. I'm not saying I don't ever feel nervous, right? But feeling nervous and just, it's that thought of like, I could never do that because, and whatever comes after that, because I don't know what to say. They might, they might not want to talk to me. Whatever that thought is, that's the thought that's keeping you from doing it. And then you just get to say, okay, so what? Like what would, like where would it go from there? Because it's that thought that's bringing that feeling. That's communicating with that feeling in your body. Like I feel anxious because what if they think I'm whatever? And so that's the thought that's keeping you from going to do it. When really, if you just answer the question, like because they would think this, then you can say like, okay, what would happen with that? Or do I care? And then once you're past that, you'd be like, no, I don't care at all. And you could go right up to them.
So like when I have anxiety, like some of the thoughts, because the voice of these thoughts can be hella loud, and some of these thoughts can be like, uh, what are they going to say about you? What are they going to think? Again, like you said, am I going to say something stupid? What are they going to say about the way I'm dressing? But I
Yeah.
love how you put it. So what? Okay, well,
Yeah.
I guess that loud voice of judgment, it gets kind of smaller and smaller when you don't give it so much power.
Yeah. And it is funny because those things that we're afraid other people are going to say or think about us or say about us are always the things that we are mean about ourselves too. It's the things that we're like, oh, I can't believe I left the house looking like this. I'm so inarticulate, or whatever it is that we say about ourselves. We're afraid other people are going to think those things. But most of the time, it's just us being mean to ourselves.
Wow. So, thank you. This has been very, like I
You're
said,
welcome.
it's been enlightening. I'm getting to know myself better in this episode,
Good.
and now kind of we're going towards the end. Going back to the podcast, do you have a favorite memory or experience during this journey of podcasting?
Mm. I have loved, so for my first year of podcasting, I think I maybe only did one or two interviews, maybe three. And I was really just doing everything was a one-on-one situation. I was just getting on and talking to myself every week. I wasn't doing interviews. I was just putting out information. And that's great. It makes it easy because I just say what I need to say and I do it. But I decided at the beginning of this past summer that I was going to do every other week. I was going to do an interview and then just an episode with myself and then an interview. I've had so much fun meeting people, just like meeting you and having people talk about their stories or tell me what they do. And I've interviewed everyone from like a clinical psychologist out in LA who does a lot of therapy on like to help people with really big time trauma. She also does like forensic psychology. She gets called into crime scenes. And I'm like, what do you do? To somebody who runs a business and does this other thing. I met somebody yesterday who started a skincare company. It's so many different things that people do. You are the first person that has ever told me a story like your life story that I'm like, I would love to have you on and hear this story. I mean, those kinds of things. I've just had so much fun meeting people and hearing how they navigate life and what they do. And I think it is important, like you said, like you asked before, about just to hear that someone else has that experience and like, oh, wow, like I can't believe how well they handled that. If they can handle that, I wonder if I could handle that. What would I do? Who can I share this with? Oh, I know somebody that needs to hear this. I'm so glad that I got to learn from this person. Now I know I can share this with someone else. I think that that's really the way that we change the world. And I mean, especially when I'm talking about anxiety, and it's such an epidemic right now in everybody from little teeny kids to the elderly. And we're just in this place where everyone is so anxious all the time that if I can help one person or two people or three people or 10 people, and they all go out and they help somebody else, it just multiplies. And pretty soon I'm like, we got this. We can knock it out. Everyone's going to feel better.
So now I come to the last question, and that is, what is your truth that heals?
Oh, my truth that heals is that you do not need to believe everything that runs through your head. Thoughts are just thoughts. Sometimes they feel scary. Sometimes they feel hilarious. Sometimes they feel truth. And sometimes you're like, what in the world did I just think? But I guess my truth is that knowing that your brain is not a fortune teller, it is not a truth teller, it is just it just thinks. And most of the things that we think are not important. But when you really pay attention to how you feel inside your body, even when I was my most anxious, even when I was 10 years old and I thought that something was horribly wrong, there was part of me knew that wasn't true. And when you get to know yourself really well, you can tell what the truth is, even when your brain is making up a bunch of garbage.
Thank you very much, Megan. And where can people in the audience find more of your work?
Yeah, you can connect with me. I'm all over social media. I'm on Threads. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, and it is Coach Megan Devito, all one word. And then my website is megandevito.com, and I have links on there to my social media and to my podcast, to my blogs, and a link to my calendar. So if anybody wants to talk about what it's like to work with me, they can just go to the Work With Me tab on my website, just megandevito.com.
Thank you so much, Megan, for being a guest on the Truth That Heals podcast.
Thank you for having me. This has been so much fun.